Coming back home, the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, has expressed concern over allegations of editorial interference and censorship at eNCA news channel. Former eNCA political reporter Samkele Maseko alleged that eNCA news chief Kanthan Pillay had censored stories in the newsroom. Maseko has since left the news channel, and for more on this story, we're now joined by Thami Nkosi from the Right to Know campaign. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having us, Peter. And
All right, so, we saw this play out on social media predominantly. Not always the best place to get a full story, but a lot was said, and I just wonder what your initial thoughts were seeing this playing out.
Look, I think it also puts back into sharp focus the whole idea about, some level of interference in editorial policy. I mean, if you go back a couple of years, maybe a year or two, the SABC had a similar sort of incidents happening internally, whether there was political interference. Maybe the reasons for eNCA is perhaps political interference, but of a different kind of nature, perhaps somebody favoring a particular party over another party, so it could be partisan as well. So I think this is bringing back to the forth what the role of the fourth estate, as the media is known, should be in society, and it raises a whole bunch of questions about media ethics and essentially how we provide a service or a disservice to the South African citizens' access to information and the right to actually be informed. So in essence, it brings back the sharp focus of the level of interference that happens behind closed doors, and essentially what stories make it out and for what reasons, and what stories are censored and for what reasons. So I think it's a general conversation that we should have into the public discourse. I mean, social media is but one small element of society, but it's much more bigger than that, to say how do we have a discourse like that, to reflect on the state of the media, to reflect on the state of interference and everything else related to it, to better the fourth estate as an important component of a functioning democracy.
Yeah. And I think we have to stress that these are untested allegations, and which is why perhaps Samkele going to the Commission of Inquiry initiated by SANEF is a good thing, where they can be properly ventilated. But it does raise questions about, it's only when somebody is leaving an institution that they feel free to be able to express themselves. And the fear then is a lot of things might be happening behind the scenes and people can't say anything.
Well, it goes to the culture of also how we're able to protect whistleblowers in this country. I think we have a cloud hanging over our heads with regards to how we protect whistleblowers, because people are afraid of reprieve. People are afraid of being blacklisted primarily because, certain people have level of influence in the largest, political and perhaps economical sphere, that somebody could be blacklisted as a Samkele and may not find a job elsewhere. So there's a whole lot of questions around how is it that we're protecting whistleblowers to actually be able to come forth with information, and for us to give them certainty that there would not necessarily be a reprieve. But what we, fighting for is essentially being able to, to put the information into the forth, because it's in the public interest to actually understand how the media, houses that they're consuming are actually influenced one way or the other. So I think for me, that's the bigger question that we need to think about, to say, what checks and balances are there to ensure that we protect our whistleblowers? What checks and balances are there to ensure that, people speak out when things happen at that particular time? Because then if it takes a longer period of time, then it's easy to almost dismiss, to say, no, well, this is so grapes or whatever the case might be. But I think generally as a society, we have not been able to, to incubate our whistleblowers to be able to essentially blow the whistle on anything that may be happening behind the scenes that we should probably know about. Because I think it's very important that we're able to create a culture that simply says it's okay for you to come out and speak out. You're not necessarily going to lose your job. If you're proven to be wrong, there could be repercussions, but it's not necessarily immediately to say if you say something, then something will definitely happen to you at that particular time. So as a result, it prohibits people from coming out and saying some of the things that they're witnessing.
All right, so a tricky area is, where does editorial control and decision-making cross the line to censorship?
I think it's one of the other discourses that we should put into the media, right? I mean, we should have perhaps have an open dialogue where we have editors, investigative journalists and everybody else involved in kind of producing the media that we consume, to simply say what is going wrong, where and how. And with regards to that, I guess perhaps bodies like SANEF can also assist us with understanding these concepts better. Is what we know or what we have as guideline, is that enough? Perhaps we need to rethink how we have these conversations. So I think there's no clear-cut, straight answer to that question, but essentially to say this is uncharted territory perhaps, and it's a good opportunity for us to reflect. This is a mirror moment for us to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, hold on, let's have a whole conversation about what do we mean by censorship, what do we mean by interference, what do we mean by what, so that it's clear for everybody to know, because sometimes the editor may be simply saying, look, this may take a particular political angle that may not sit well with a particular party. We don't want to take the stance as a broadcaster. Perhaps there's something to be heard with that, but how far does it go with essentially saying, well, everything about it then doesn't make it out? Perhaps there's a conversation to be had to say, maybe this sounds partisan, maybe this sounds anti-political party, maybe this sounds anti-character. Perhaps let's find a way in between to put the story out and let the public make up their own mind. I think that ultimately that's who should make up whether this story is necessary or not.
So let me ask you this now. The public broadcaster, I think, is under different rules because the broadcaster belongs to the public, so they have to be treated in a certain way. But private media, should they be told you must be fair? Can they not be partisan? Can they not take sides?
We learned these lessons, right? I mean, there's a new movie that came out recently about what had happened when Bush and them were pushing for a war in Iraq and all sorts of things. It plays out in the media room where the editor says one thing, but journalists are saying the other thing. And this is a privately owned media house, and it raises all sorts of questions about how far do you go in tampering with how private media houses should actually conduct themselves? But for me, the bigger problem becomes if you have an influence in shaping opinion, if you have a possibility of polarizing ideas in society, then there is some level of responsibility that you need to take. And I think it's an ethical question that perhaps is confronting privately owned media houses to simply say, how far are we willing to push the ticket? Because ultimately, you bear the responsibility to function within the ambits of the Constitution to ensure that you are free and fair. So in as much as you're private, but you also bear the responsibility to ensure that what you're informing people about is not necessarily biased to shape any particular propaganda for your own behalf.
All right, so Maseko is going to this commission of inquiry. Is there any expectation that you have from his former employer? Look,
I think for me, it would be good to just have a dialogue on this. I think this antagonistic nature that, and always bickering between people usually shuts down the conversation. And I think we miss an opportunity every time we shout at each other and shut down a conversation. For me, it would be important to simply say, look, we'll subject ourselves to an open process that seeks to generate knowledge and better ideas on how best we handle the situation. So for me, that would be the key thing. It's not so much about what comes out of the commission. Of course, I mean, that would inform how this thing unfolds, but the first attitude should be, or the default position should simply saying, we'll get there to a space, have a conversation, you put your issue across, we put our issue across. Let's have a dialogue that simply says, how do we reach a consensus, wherein we can be able to move forward collectively as a society, because ultimately it will have an impact on society and the media and the attitudes and all sorts of things.
We ran out of time, but one last thing I must ask you, it's not okay to call people rats.
It's not okay to?
Call people rats.
Yeah, no. It's the Guinea Watts type of language. It's the porch monkey type of language. And I think it's derogatory in its use. And I think it ought to be rejected for all intents and purposes. We shouldn't be in a society where we equate people with minute kind of animals with an idea of actually, shaping a particular weakness in them or degrading their identity or degrading even their character. So no, the use of words like rats now should not necessarily be tolerated.
Thami, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for coming through and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this.